Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Launch Sequence Podcast. This week, I've got my friend Paul, the AstroPub, with me for an episode that's a little bit different than we've been doing. We are going to touch on a game that I don't normally touch on that much, Starfield. It is a different kind of game from Star Citizen, obviously, still star-related, but it's smaller, we'll say. It's from a AAA studio, Bethesda, and it's a single-player game. And the reason that we're covering it is because, well, we love space games, but for people who don't really know who we are, we cover that game, Star Citizen, that people call a scam, and yeah.
We really play with JPEG ships.
Yes, we like JPEGs.
For those of you coming in.
That's why we're so excited about Starfield, because all we've gotten is JPEGs.
It's got the best JPEGs right now. It's just the AAA. It's the best JPEGs.
They are nice
JPEG
JPEGs.
game.
They are. And for the people who also watch this and say, wait a second, Space Tomato and AstroPub are ditching ship and going to Starfield, that is not the case. We'll probably talk about Star Citizen today, and we'll be back on it next week. But this is a new entry into a genre that's flourishing right now. Space games are kind of on the up and up, and it's a really exciting space. We wanted to touch on a new game that's entering that space. We both think that it has a lot of potential, and you guys might be interested in it. So if you will, humor us for an hour or so, and we'll tell you what you might be able to expect from this game that's scheduled at least to come out later this year. So, AstroPub, why don't you go ahead and start us off with a little introduction as to what Starfield is? It's a big question.
I will give the shortest history lesson of Starfield that I can imagine. I can tell you. Starfield has its origins from 1990. When Roland Emmerich, the guy who made Independence Day and all those disaster films that now no longer, the Moonfall, the latest one that tanked.
What's Moonfall?
He wanted. It's his latest movie. It's terrible.
Okay.
It's about the moon crashing on Earth, but it's actually a spaceship.
That makes sense. The moon is falling.
He made Day After Tomorrow, 2012.
Those were fun.
Yeah, Independence Day. Yeah. In the 90s, Steven Spielberg was getting into video games. And so Roland Emmerich and his crew also wanted to try to get into video games a little bit. And so they partnered with Bethesda to make a game that I can't remember the name of it, but it was like the 10th Planet or something like that. And it never got off the ground. But it was a space action game in the same vein as Wing Commander, because it was made around the same time Wing Commander was doing really well. So space games were the rage.
Yeah, a little parallelism there.
Yeah. So it ended up getting canned, but when Todd Howard went to work at Bethesda in the late 90s, early 2000s, there's several posts of him talking about how he always wanted to make a space game. Obviously Todd Howard, probably older than us, but not by much. He obviously, got his career started, and when he was starting his career, it was a lot of games like Elite and Wing Commander around, and the X-Wing versus TIE Fighter games had been out for a while. So, so Bethesda's always kind of tried to do space games and science fiction games. They kick around a lot of the ideas, but they never really made their own IP. They actually had a Star Trek IP at one point for a game, and I think they made a Star Trek game.
That's something that's always caught me off guard with Bethesda is like how many different crazy out of left field games they did when they were first starting off with publishing and stuff. It's pretty funny.
But right around the time Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous started to become successes, Bethesda started talking about doing a game. We actually heard about it first through a patent that it's a trademark or patent that they filed for the name Starfield. This is like 2013, 2014 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so people started going, hey, what? Because this was around the same time Fallout 4 was getting to its release date, and people were like, what's going to come next? Is it going to be the next Elder Scrolls game? And then we found out that Starfield was the game, and it's a science fiction RPG that's got a lot of hardcore elements to it. And we've recently learned that it has flight, apparently. So manual flight.
Yeah.
But if you've played games like Skyrim or Fallout, it's probably something you can expect something fairly similar, but in a more science fiction genre. And Bethesda often calls the genre NASA punk is the way they describe it. So little bit of cyberpunk, a little bit of NASA, kind of mixed together in terms of its aesthetic and its vibe. So
for the citizens out there, it's Drake. Really, it got all the hardware switches in there. It looks like it works, but it's that same idea.
It's Drake if Drake made the Avenger.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, all right, so like this is a game that's then been not really long in the making, because a lot of people saw that statement on the first trailer, like 20 years in the making or something like that. And they're like, oh, they've been developing this game for 20 years.
No. But this has been an idea that's been in Todd Howard's head for 20 years.
Yeah.
So like since 2002. Actually, the post that he made is still available somewhere, where he talked about that he always wanted to make a space game. And I think it was from 2002. So that's why they call it 20 years in the making.
I mean, who wouldn't?
Baby.
It's just so exciting. So they've been making a lot of games since that original idea came out. And from what I've heard Todd talk about, it seems like he wants this to be more kind of like those older games, Daggerfall, Morrowind, rather than Skyrim and Fallout 4. Have you played a lot of the older Bethesda games? Do you know kind of where he's coming from when he says that?
Yeah, I played Morrowind. My wife always hates me because I never beat Morrowind, because I never got past the initial quest lines because I didn't know where to go, and because I was 14 years old and I was used to like, go here to this objective. I just didn't see the objective and I didn't read anything. So my wife keeps always kind of poops on me for that. But yeah, I played Morrowind, and the best way of describing it is, if you've played the older style games like, say, the original Baldur's Gate or the original Fallouts, the original Mass Effect, like maybe Mass Effect 1 or the Knights of the Old Republic game, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. That's kind of where they're going towards, though I doubt that it's going to be as limited in scope, much more open in scope.
But it's just a very classic RPG kind of feel. Yeah,
a lot of stat balancing, a lot of unforgiving. They're not going to handhold you. They like I said, I didn't even beat Morrowind because it didn't tell me where the next quest was. I don't doubt they're going to do that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's plenty of like, here's your objective. You have to read this document, and but we're not going to tell you where everything is.
Yeah,
we're not going to have a map with like 4,000 different markers. You have to go find out where that is. So
kind of dips into that immersive sim genre a little bit. Like, you got tools, figure out how to use them. So unlike with the game we normally cover, Star Citizen, which is skill based, you don't unlock things and put points behind certain skills. This game is going to be really about building that character and making sure they do exactly what you want them to do. I always loved that, like, you could, in a Bethesda game, you could just max out your sneak to the point where you're basically invisible as soon as you walk into a building. What kind of...
I'm hoping for the opposite thing too. Like, for instance, Fallout 1 or was it Fallout 2, you could drop your intelligence score super low and you'd get unique dialogue options.
Right.
It's called like the meathead playthrough, where you would just be like,
didn't they do that in New Vegas too? There was some stuff like that. Yeah. I would say if Bethesda, if you want to see something where Bethesda's been talking about, play New Vegas. Right.
Now, that's not a Bethesda game. That's an Obsidian game. Yeah. But I think that seems to be where they're taking a lot of their inspiration from, is that style of game.
Which is also kind of interesting because Obsidian is also making their own space RPG under the same house now, because Bethesda and Obsidian are both with Microsoft. It's weird how, like, everything
time is a flat circle.
Yeah.
Time is a flat circle. And
then on top of that, like, you remember when Mass Effect 1 came out and it was the new space game RPG and Microsoft was like, mine, and they bought it up for that exclusivity, and now it's the same thing with Starfield. What was it?
EA who bought it. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But they did the same thing. Yeah.
It went like exclusively to the Xbox though, right? When it released.
Yeah. They paid a lot of money for it.
Yeah. And now, like, the same thing's happening with Starfield. It's just so weird how that works out. But that's always been one of the things that kept me with Microsoft, is that they double down on those kinds of games.
Yeah. I mean, Microsoft, I think there's, I have a I have a conspiracy theory, a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, that there's somebody who works at Microsoft Games who's been there since like the 80s or whenever they were formed, who just really likes space games, because Microsoft published Freelancer, the original Freelancer, the last Chris Roberts game before Star Citizen. And they're doing, Microsoft or Mass Effect 1, and now they're doing Starfield. It's like there's somebody who's there secretly behind, desperately pulling levers, like more space games, Halo, yes, more like this.
The Microsoft Illuminati, they're pulling the levers back there. They're like, yeah, everybody keep focusing on fantasy, but space is where it's at. I like it though. The fact that we have a game that is kind of derivative to the main game that I'm interested in, because it's definitely not the same. If this were another space sim coming out, I don't think I'd be as excited, because that's, if I'm getting steaks at one place, I don't want to go and get like one other kind of steak at another place. I want something completely different, and I feel like Starfield is aiming for something like that.
I feel like the difference is like Star Citizen is like a nice steakhouse, but then or I should say, Star Citizen's like a nice steakhouse, and Starfield is more like going to a really good Mexican restaurant.
Ooh.
You're gonna get carne asada at the Mexican restaurant, but it's gonna be different because you're gonna get your other sides and other things, whereas you're gonna go get your nice porterhouse at the steakhouse. Both are meat, both good, both the same quality, but you're gonna get a little different flavors of it, which is nice.
And I'm getting that carnitas burrito too. It can't be beaten. Yeah. Cannot. Well, Starfield is actually, let's take a step back and talk about the other games that have come out that like kind of sat in this genre, because Star Citizen, Elite Dangerous, No Man's Sky, these are the big kind of space sim type of games that have been, I won't say dominating the genre because there's not much to be dominated, but there are other space sims out there, but those are the three I feel main ones that get the most attention. And in between all of that, we got like Mass Effect Andromeda and Outer Worlds. I believe those were the only two space-based RPGs we got. Were there any others that you could think of?
Not really. I mean, that's about it. I mean, we also had things like Star Wars Squadrons, which was obviously a response to that, but it was much more flight-based.
Yeah.
We also had, we had a lot of flight games, not a lot of RPGs. I think that's about it. And I mean, we also had like, it's a weird thing because we put these three games in there, but you also got to remember things like Infinite Warfare came out, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare came out, which was again tech putting into that science fiction realm, but making it more action based. I wouldn't be surprised if CD Projekt Red saw successes of places like things like Elite and Star Citizen and said, "There's a market for science fiction. Let's greenlight. Let's kick that cyberpunk game we've always wanted to make. Let's do that." I think there's an element of a handful of these games came out and did well in kind of more of the indie space, and so that the bigger hitters are going, we need to dip our toes to see if we're not gonna, because maybe we can hit that home run. And I think that's what Bethesda hopes, is that Starfield isn't just another Bethesda Games RPG, but they want it to be like Skyrim or like what Morrowind or Fallout 3 was, where it's just this huge kick in the pants and everyone just remembers it really, really well.
Yeah.
Though as we go further along, I know a lot of people don't like Fallout 3, but that kind of, at the time it was this like, kickstarting a lot of new ideas. Like there had been post-apocalyptic games out for a long time, including the original Fallouts, but you had like DayZ that would come out afterwards for like zombie games and stuff. But like Fallout 3 Fallout, the series, is the game that people kind of default to when it comes to just post-apocalyptic or like survival games or post-apocalyptic games. I think that's what they're hoping with Starfield, is that Starfield is the default, that the people are going to go, oh, this is, you think space games, oh, Starfield. I think that's what they're hoping for.
Yeah,
and I think it has lots to do with these other games.
Yeah, genre defining. It's kind of like it could be a tentpole both for Bethesda themselves and Microsoft in that aspect, and then also for space games as a whole. Like you were saying, like, we've gotten a game like Infinite Warfare, which is like a high octane combat version of sci-fi. We've gotten the very, very interesting but smaller kinds of things like Outer Wilds. We've gotten like the mid-tier RPGs, the flight sims, all these different things that are space-based, but no like nothing that's just straight taken it and ran away. Like you were saying, Fallout is very, very good at post-apocalyptic, holding that up, inspiring other games to do that. Honestly, Cyberpunk was going to be one of those games, right? It was going to hold up the cyberpunk genre and bring people into other things like The Ascent and Observer and other things like that, Deus Ex. And then I'm sure Skyrim acts as that same kind of thing for fantasy. There's a lot of fantasy games, so they can't really do that all the time. But like, yeah, Starfield being that game that holds it up and becomes like just a series that is always associated with sci-fi could be huge. And on top of that, one of the things that I'm really looking forward to, there's a lot of conversation surrounding like, oh, is this going to be something that takes away focus from Star Citizen? Is this going to be something that pulls people away from Star Citizen? Yeah, I mean, they're different games. Like they're gonna appeal to different people in different parts of a person's gaming attitude, but also this game's probably going to bring more people to Star Citizen, right? They're going to experience this and want more.
I was going to say that like it's the important thing you pointed out. Like I think Skyrim, for instance, is baby's first fantasy game. A lot of people may have played Skyrim and then went out and go, I like this, but I want more. And they went out and they found other games in the genre that they may have missed or not known about before, and they picked it up and started playing it. I think Fallout's a similar way, where many people will be like, hey, this is a really cool aesthetic. I like this aesthetic. Is there something similar? And they went out and found other survival games, or maybe picked up the original Fallouts. Those sorts of kind of a gateway drug to the genre.
The good stuff.
And I could definitely see Starfield being that gateway drug if Bethesda manages to stick the landing, because I'm a big proponent, and I think a lot of people are as well, that more space games is good. More competition in this field is good, because it means that there's a healthy market, which means more people will make more games. And I like space and science fiction games.
So like that's going to be so great. If this is a success, we're going to get more space games. Other companies are going to follow suit, and that's fantastic. I was going to say there's another game that acted exactly like what you're talking about. Baby's first, this type of game. Elden Ring has introduced tons of people to the Souls-like genre that are like, oh, wait, this is actually kind of fun. Let me try all of these other games that do that stuff. People are going to go jump out of a spaceship in Starfield, if you're able to do that, float into space and be like, whoa, this is sick. Imagine if there was another spaceship next to mine that I could jump into.
What if I could get my friends to come up onto? Yeah.
It's such a natural progression. And if it doesn't happen, 2 days after the game's launch, that's something that happens over the course of several years. And I think it's as good a time as any, really, for that to happen for Star Citizen, because it's finally starting to get things together.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that separates these RPGs from the space sims that everybody who generally watches this podcast loves is the ability to actually fly the ship. And we've gotten kind of confirmation. I'm skeptical still as to like how much of spaceflight is really happening in the game, but we've seen some leaks now this past week of a game developer who worked for Bethesda, who has been verified on the website, Reset Era, which I've always pronounced Resetera until I started hearing other people say it. But and he was saying that, okay, yeah, there's spaceflight, but it's not great. Something that I've been worried about, honestly, with them working on something like that for a game like this. What's your take on this, though?
I think it's legitimate, especially when Jason Schreier comes out and says this guy used to work for Bethesda. Jason Schreier is probably one of the best investigative journalists for gaming in history. Yeah. If he says it, it's pretty much gold standard. And multiple people came out and confirmed that he did work for it. And he seemed to be confused, which was weird. Is like, this is all normal information. And it's like, Bethesda, do you not look at your own subreddit? Because like every other post in the Starfield subreddit for the last year has been, is there going to be space flight?
This guy's like, wait, you guys don't know that?
Don't you guys have phones? That's exactly, almost like that moment. Yeah. And my take is listen, anyone who has played any space game or followed any space game development can tell you space flight is hard. Not only is it hard to actually achieve, but it's hard to make feel good. Because there's nothing really that exists that's similar. You can do things like, oh, it's just a plane in space, do Star Wars style, but then you just lose a lot of the feel of it if you wanted to go more immersive and more realistic. But if you go too sim, you end up with something that's slow and pondering. So I hope they managed to at least get it to working okay. I wouldn't expect like X-Wings.
Yeah.
I'd expect Firefly. Less exciting dogfights and more
just traveling.
Traveling and some fighting, but like slow moving, like less Star Wars, more Star Trek. Less about high octane dogfights and more submarine warfare. Slow ships maneuvering to go and fight each other. That kind of thing.
But the interesting thing when you think about it like that is like, how bad can that feel, right? Because the first thing that this developer said is, oh, there's space flight, but it doesn't feel good. And it's like, well, if we're just doing sort of general travel from one planet to another and maybe getting into some faster than normal travel, but not necessarily getting that deep into dogfights, then how bad could it be?
I think it's boring. Maybe that way. I don't think that. Yeah, that's why I think it's bad. I don't think it's bad because I think about Star Citizen's problem. Star Citizen has a problem where if you change the current formula up just a little bit, you end up with two ships just circling around each other and shooting at each other. So if you slow things down, might end up being just, whoever can hit the person first on the other side wins. Yeah. So if you're shooting you're shooting your space guns at the other spaceship. If you manage to shoot off first and hit, then you just win because they can't maneuver out of the way. And so I can imagine that it's probably less exciting and probably less just boring, just kind of crappy,
It's
that would be my guess.
There's so many things that go into it. This is why I've been leaning more towards that camp of, no, they're not going to do that. Because like you said, it's so easy for space travel to be boring because it's so hard to show people how fast they're going, right? And then if you try and fix that by making people go really fast, then you have to like change the size of the whole game because now they're going on planets too quickly. They're getting too close to the ground too fast. So it's crazy. And I guess it all comes down to, what are they actually going to make us use the flight for? I think I'd be perfectly fine with flight in between planets being fast travel, right? And then once you get into the range of a planet, you have to manually get through the atmosphere, find a place to land, because that feels more along the lines of what they're trying to sell with this game, which is like exploration, finding areas on planets. But I don't know. I don't know what to expect.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of different statements they've made. Like they wanted to make a Han Solo simulator, but it's also NASA punk is their aesthetic. So I would say that I would venture, because they also have space pirates. The Crimson Fleet is a major protagonist or antagonist, or I guess one of the major factions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's more than likely that combat will play into it, but we don't really see a lot of space fighters, so I'd expect something that's more Age of Sail, more of that kind of feel. And I guess you could speed that up a little bit and still make it feel good. I've played games say World of Warships is a great example of something like that, where you have you have to deal with obstacles around you, but it's all about getting into the right little place and maneuvering properly and
planning ahead.
Yeah, planning ahead, and but still, mostly you can focus on the exploration. I don't think the focus is going to be on the combat. I think combat is just going to be an incidental.
Yeah. So. I would be really excited to see them treat spaceships in this game as like a moving home. Doubling down on that aspect of make sure that your systems are running well, you're keeping everything updated, your life support's good, all that kind of stuff, and making us really think about that, because that's one of the more interesting parts of Star Citizen. That's what sets it apart from other space sims. So I think Bethesda's in a good spot to also kind of double down on stuff like that. Yeah,
I agree.
Let's talk about the factions you mentioned. So That's kind of, yeah, it's dipping a little more into your wheelhouse.
Welcome to my world there, Keenan.
So this is like going beyond gameplay. Factions and lore is probably one of the best parts, or one of the things that can separate one space game from another. So is Starfield unique in that aspect? Are they shipping something that is convincing and interesting to you? And I guess just for fun, how does it compare to Star Citizen's lore so far?
Well, Star Citizen has the advantage of it's been worked on for 10 years, and so it has a lot more detail. But Starfield is no slouch. Starfield's concept is still, it still seems a little bit nebulous, but that's probably because they want to save a lot of those details for the game itself. They want to introduce you to the game through the storyline. But we do know the bare bones. And the bare bones is the year is 2330. And in 2330, and you're in what's called the settled systems. Now, the settled systems is a range from Earth to about 50 light years out from Earth, which coincidentally, IRL means that range is anywhere between 113 stars to 2,000 stars potentially reachable.
Let me stop you right there. So a lot of people keep hearing this statement and think that entire swath of space is going to be the game space. Are you?
Yes.
Are you thinking that? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. How?
Yes.
How would that work?
So the reality is that the amount of those stars that are actually have planets is probably a fraction of that total number.
Okay.
And the number of those that have planets that are livable are even smaller. So I think the reality is that Bethesda could easily put in hundreds, if not thousands of stars. They're just stars. They're just big balls of burning gas with maybe some dust around it.
You think they would be visitable though? Or do you think they'd just be like,
so.
Yeah? Huh. That would be very cool.
I think they do that. I mean, it really depends on the memory issues for them. I think that's the real thing.
Right.
And I will say this is that the way that they're building the lore definitely tells me that Bethesda wants to build systems, not just planets, but systems, massive numbers of systems inside this game.
See, now you're getting me too excited, man. Come on.
Well, the emphasis on exploration, the kind of various different concept arts. Now, I think people are going to be a little sad in that I don't think that every planet is going to have something like, say, Star Citizen levels or Elite Dangerous or No Man's Sky, where you have this just huge space you can actually explore. I think it's more likely a map, maybe a big map, like 64 by 64 kilometers, but it's probably going to be,
which would be crazy.
It's just so big. I mean, like every single planet is that huge, is basically the size of Skyrim, is a huge deal. Yeah. It's a massive amount of content. If you have even a dozen planets, that's a dozen Skyrims. I don't think it's going to be as tightly packed of content, but that's not the point, because it's all about exploration. That's what they've been kind of really pushing. So the settled systems are a system about 50 light years across. Likely there's going to be a lot of systems there, but we do know of several different factions. One of the main faction, and probably the protagonist faction that you play as part of, is called the Constellation group. Now, Constellation, it's hard to tell, but Constellation seems to be kind of the explorers, the original explorers who may have mapped these systems and went through and explored them and made them ready for future colonization. We also know there are two major government groups. One is known as the United Colonies, and the other one's known as the Freestar Collective. They both fought a war about 20 years before the game started, that was called the Colony Wars, between the Freestar Collective and the United Colonies. We don't know who won, but we know it was pretty brutal. And on top of that, we also have other factions, religious cults, and pirates, specifically the Crimson Fleet, which is this organization of pirates who works together and kind of terrorizes the Freestar Collective and maybe spilling out into the United Colonies a little bit.
Our Dread Pirates Roberts, or whatever they call them.
Yeah, and I think it's almost confirmed now that you will be able to play, work for the Crimson Fleet if you want to in game. But in terms of the universe they're building, it feels very much like the settled systems are in an awkward place of post-war peace. It seems like the Freestar Collective, which are much more rugged and they seem more colonial. If you watch Firefly, they feel much more like if the Browncoats had won. They're kind of on the edge. They seem to have smaller numbers of systems, and the United Colonies is much more traditional sci-fi colony, like government.
The center of or the concentration of people.
Yeah. I've compared it to the United Federation of Planets from Star Trek. It's the vibe they're trying to go for. So you have these two sides where, like, the Crimson Fleet, for instance, has stopped raiding into Freestar Collective space and started moving into the United Colony space, which is causing some problems. We actually saw a leaked document, an order, basically some orders that were sent out by an admiral being like, the Crimson Fleet are starting to mess with us in our colony space. We need to start moving out some of our forces out there to deal with this problem.
I like that. Setting the backdrop.
So we're seeing a world that is sort of in transition, that has many different players that you may have to be able to interact with. And there seems to be a lot of, again, emphasis on exploration. So even though this is called the Settled Systems, there's likely many other planets that we may or may not be able to visit at release that will be only partially explored or almost entirely abandoned. So obviously other stories and other people to get yourself involved in, but one of the things that Bethesda really does really well with is, hey, here's your introduction. Hey, congratulations, you're not in the universe. You can ignore the main quest for the next 70 hours and enjoy yourself. It feels very much like this whole system feels very built up for that sort of experience.
Right.
And as I said before, it feels like the lore seems solid as a starting point. We really have to see the characters that are involved and how the different factions interact with one another. You know, is the Freestar Collective and the United Colonies, are they kind of mostly friends now? Are they still kind of rivals? You know, who are the Crimson Fleet? Who are there's a corporation that runs its own basically unregulated drug den / Vegas.
Yeah. The city on water, Neon.
City on the water. Yeah. Neon. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So that's. I mean, there's a lot of these different factions, and we still have to see how they interact with one another. But they definitely have built out a very believable universe.
So the lore is, it sets up this idea that, like you said, it's sort of a transition of not power, but and not really a Cold War. It's just kind of, there's tension going on, and there's raids. There are these two governments that are clearly still kind of at odds, haven't figured everything out. So there's a sense of war and combat in the background. But in this game, we have been told now that we work for a company called Constellation, not that Constellation, and we are part of the last group of explorers. Now, they kind of set it up to make it sound like, yes, this is an old, well-developed part of space, but there's still a lot out there that we don't know. And your main job in the game is to explore. And from the trailer, it seems like maybe to find something big. To me, it looked like the gateway to the Ark from Halo 3. But you know what? we'll see what it is. And so it sounds like they're kind of giving you a choice here of, yes, the game's based in exploration, but there's clearly going to be a lot of combat and conflict going on that'll let you kind of pick a different role. Now, the game Go ahead.
I was going to say, it feels like I always said at the very beginning, Constellation feels like it was like a NASA program that was built when humanity first started to leave its, go to the stars. And they've been around, Constellation's been around so long, and because of the long distance and time required to travel, they, at least they may have faster than light travel now, but probably at the beginning they didn't. It feels like the Constellation is one of those like family things where the 200 or so people of Constellation just kept, they had kids, and then their kids had kids, and then all of their kids just kind of inherited the mantle of being Constellation.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's what kind of the vibe goes for, is that like they're a family. Like you can become part of Constellation if you're not part of a family, but if you're part of the family, you've got an in, and you're expected to pick up that job and continue forward.
It definitely has that feel of like, we are very close. We're a small group that does something that nobody else really cares about, and that's why we love you. You're like, yeah, I'm going to go find stuff for you. So that's an exciting backdrop, because one of the best things about space is exploration.
Yeah.
And they kind of complicate it with the idea that you're working for, they don't explicitly say it, but possibly a dying company.
Mm-hmm. Like a dying group of like the last of your kind sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's even more complicated because now you have to deal with the other factions in the universe. And you don't know how well they'll handle with you, you know? Mm-hmm. So
the most direct comparison we have to this, for considering the games that we cover and the games that people who are mostly listening to this podcast play, we do Star Citizen and Squadron 42. This would be more comparable to Squadron 42.
Yes.
But it is wildly different in that Squadron 42 is very cinematic, narrative, on the rails, one story, you play through it, you're a military person, whereas this game is more kind of pick your game. So the people who maybe are more interested in Star Citizen and not looking to do a military campaign, is this something that you'd say almost could take the place of Squadron 42 for them? Or
if you're more into, if you play like No Man's Sky or Star Citizen or Elite, and your idea is like, I'm just gonna go explore, I'm just gonna go tour around and see sunsets, but you want to have maybe a little bit of story to tell you, a little bit of universe to interact with. This is very much that kind of thing. If you're into playing an action movie, Squadron 42. If you're looking for an open world single player experience that Bethesda's really good at, Starfield seems to be the thing. So
you're not going to get Mark Hamill though, unfortunately.
Nope.
Who knows? Sadly. Maybe they'll have their own Keanu Reeves on this stage this year.
Yeah.
I hope not. God, I hope not.
Yeah. I'm kind of done with gimmick actors. Like, just give me good actors.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know about you, but I feel like that game probably changed for him, right?
Yeah,
it was
for sure.
Yeah, that was a bummer. We're talking about Cyberpunk 2077 for anybody who didn't catch all of that nonsense. But this game seems like they do not care at all to talk about actors, and I've never seen Bethesda really focus on that kind of stuff at all. If anything, aren't you usually unvoiced as a protagonist up until recently?
Up until Fallout 4, you were unvoiced. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I can't say I feel one way or the other about that, but I do hope that they don't force us into a specific story like they did with Fallout 4. Although it seems kind of like that's where it's going with the Constellation thing, but we'll see.
We'll see. I have my hopes.
Yeah. So
I feel like Constellation is more like they're going to have a goal in mind that you have to achieve, and it's how you achieve it is up to you. And because you're like the last of the Constellation group or something like that, that may make sense.
Yeah, I can see that. So there's one thing that always seems to come up whenever I start talking about Starfield. I say we dive into it a little bit and really dig to the bottom of people's problems. And that is that Bethesda Bad, Paul. Bethesda Bad. Glitches and terrible games, and just it won't be worth it at all. So why are we even talking about the game?
Because as much as I'll say this, as much as the internet thinks Bethesda bad, Bethesda not bad.
Bethesda make mistake. Bethesda does have glitches. I'll say that much. But to be quite honest, have you ever jumped into a Bethesda game and actually not wanted to play it because of glitches?
No, never had it. I mean, I had some issues with Fallout 76 when it first released.
But,
that's different.
I wasn't even thinking that, honestly. That's another room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also important to differentiate Bethesda from Fallout 76 and say Fallout 4 and Bethesda, the Microsoft subsidiary.
Right.
We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but it felt like a lot of pressure was put on Bethesda to produce games like Fallout 76 because it could make them money, and they needed money to keep the doors open and the lights on. But after, they got sold to Microsoft, Bethesda doesn't have to care about that anymore. No one has to sit around and be like, okay, we got to figure out how to pay money. It's like Big Daddy Microsoft is just throwing the money around, so you don't have to worry about it. You just focus on making your game.
They got that space money.
Yeah, they got that Bill Gates money.
They got that we will build a real spaceship money.
Yeah. So as a result, it may be hopium. I'm not going to deny that it may be hopium, but I think what we're more likely to see is we're going to see the pinnacle of Bethesda games in the sense that in the modern era, in the sense that Bethesda is much better at open world storytelling games without linear plots, or really rigid plots, because every time they've done that, they've kind of fallen on their face.
Yeah.
But every single game they've ever done has had better combat. The combat of Skyrim was much better than it was in Oblivion. The combat in Fallout 3 was, or Fallout 4 is just head and shoulders above Fallout 3 and New Vegas. It's just so tight and good. The gunplay feels really good. Obviously, there's some places you can improve, but there is a lot of improvement over the game, and they've also taken a lot of modders and a lot of mod ideas into these games to improve their experiences overall. So, as much as Bethesda can make mistakes and has problems, as anyone who will say Bethesda bad will almost always say, "Oh, I won't buy it at release. I'll wait till modders make it work."
Yeah,
which is true.
But if
we're talking about like a game that at least seems like the scope that we're looking at with Starfield, multiple planets, exploration, all these sorts of things, you're gonna have a pretty decent background for a lot of modding potential at the very least with that. Now, would I say jump out and buy it on launch? Probably not. This is still Bethesda.
Yeah. and honestly, there are easier ways to get it than to buy it. Like go get a month of Game Pass for a fraction of the price and get it day one.
Get it for free.
Sponsored by Microsoft.
There are trailers. Please. There are trial editions you can get it for free. So you want to go try it for free? Make a Microsoft account. When it releases, drop Game Pass, and suddenly you've got a free copy of Starfield you can play.
In addition to every other game that they make, it is actually a pretty cool deal. But I mean, it'll come out day one. Don't get it day one, but also consider that like. Even if it's a glitchy game, right? If this is a decent space game, I think it's going to be a success because they don't need to knock it out of the park. They just need to start off this series without flopping it off right out the gate, right? And that'll show everybody else that they can sell 10 million copies and people will make more space games.
It needs to be Mass Effect 1, a solid entry that you can see this universe and go, I like this.
Yeah.
I want to see where this goes.
Yep.
Because then they can take everything they learned, and then Starfield 2, Star Harder, is going to be, much better than the previous one. And again, we're talking about a Bethesda that is not the same Bethesda that made Fallout 76 and Fallout 4. This is I would say, a more evolved Bethesda.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but it doesn't feel like that.
It's been almost 10 years since they've made an actual game. Fallout 76, it was a subsidiary.
Bethesda Austin made it.
Okay.
They're the ones who made it. It was made by the main game, but they had like a different company that they originally had done mobile titles that they purchased that actually made the game.
Yeah.
So.
And they've like you said, they've been bought by Microsoft. And looking at what Microsoft has been doing in terms of marketing, the last year Halo Infinite was their big game, right? It's the biggest franchise, I think, in gaming that Microsoft has ever made. It's their main seller, sells consoles, and I love that game, to be honest. But that was their main game last year. You know what they were pushing most in marketing at E3? Because it wasn't Halo. It was Starfield. They opened E3 with Starfield. They had Todd come out and talk Starfield. Then they closed E3 with all of their major games, and they made sure to put Starfield in there and have it the last be shown. Microsoft's pushing this. I think this is going to be like their major series moving forward in their next, the next decade of gaming. This seems like it's what they want to really represent Xbox game studios going forward. Besides, maybe some of the other big franchises like, well, actually, I was going to say Fable, but no, Fable would not be up there. This really feels like a big game moving forward for them. So I think people maybe are putting too much emphasis on the fact that Bethesda is the studio and forgetting that Microsoft is the publisher.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Is Microsoft's putting a lot of money behind this, and they're going to push it out. You're going to see Starfield commercials on your YouTube channel. Probably if you're watching this in like June, when like right when it drops, like I think it's
June 12th.
16th, June 12th, when they're going to show gameplay. By the way, that's when you're gonna see gameplay is June 12th, not before.
Finally.
Yeah, that's typical for Bethesda. They kind of do that, but
yeah.
That lead up to June 12th, you're going to see nothing but Starfield trailers. Like again, if you're watching this in June 9th, 2022, you probably watched like 2 Starfield trailers already.
They just stack
this podcast.
Got the mid rolls.
And that's what Microsoft's gonna do. They're just gonna throw the money out there because they want people to buy Game Pass. They want people to buy Xboxes, and they're gonna use their games to do that, like Starfield.
And it's also it falls in line too with what Microsoft's been doing like the last 5 to 7 years. Phil Spencer has been doing an amazing job with Xbox, getting back to like what makes them great, which is investing in good studios and pumping out good games. And like they've really been doubling down on getting value to customers. I don't think that they're just going to go and make the biggest purchase in gaming history and then just like let Starfield come out and deflate. That'd be crazy. If they do that, it would be nuts. I said doo-doo. But if they did that, like if they let that happen, that would be one of the greatest failures I think Microsoft has had. Worse than the Zune, I'll say.
I mean, hey, if you believe the internal leaks, the accidental leak that the guy had, it sounded like they were doing great.
They got a lot of content.
They got content. And before anyone, because I saw a lot of people commenting on those, it's like, oh, it's going to be bad graphics and the flight's terrible and the engine sucks. And kind of clarified it even later. It's like, anyone who's ever even modded for the Creation Engine knows it's a hot pile of garbage. Not that the engine is bad, it's just really hard to work with because it's duct taped together as an engine to make it work.
God, I hope they were going to fix that with Creation too. If they didn't, then that's, oh boy, that's not good for the long run.
But at the very least, and also like as I said, flight is complicated, but also he even said it's subjective. He may not like flight, but it could be somebody else's bag.
Yeah.
And he also said, like, it doesn't look like Horizon Forbidden West, but they're not really pumping out. Like, the goal of this game isn't to be, look at the pretty sunsets. The goal of this game is to have content, playability, immersion, the old school RPG. And they're going to probably sacrifice really, really pretty graphics for good, solid gameplay and lots of it.
That being
not a bad option.
That being said, though, they've been showing us a lot of really cool biomes, so they better look good. They better have a pretty good minimum global illumination. Hit me with the colors. Let me get that contrast. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be. If it's as big as you're talking about, if they have multiple planets, I'm not going to expect the best graphics out there. So
yeah, I mean, they also built, I think was it the lighting engine that they rebuilt from scratch? So they did a bunch of new things for Starfield to just up the quality dramatically. So
cool. What kind of things are you looking forward to from a game like this, considering that we spend basically every day, if not every week, or rather every week, if not every day, playing what I already consider to be the best in space experience you can get, despite the glitches and stuff.
I'd agree.
So what can Starfield offer more?
A more traditional RPG experience, a single player experience, a story that you can control a little bit more, and mod support.
Ooh.
I doubt you're ever going to get to fly the Millennium Falcon in Star Citizen, but I can almost guarantee you'll be able to fly the Millennium Falcon in Starfield.
That would be, wow. That'd be really fun to see if they do, how in-depth they get ship interiors in this game, and to see somebody actually finally take God, I almost called it the Mercury Star Runner, the Millennium Falcon, and get the interior modeled with the exterior of the ship.
This is Bethesda's community we're talking about. The Bethesda community is filled with very talented people who have nothing better to do than to make incredibly detailed mods for like poop animations, like for eating cycles. Like,
Oh gosh.
This is the community that'll take a look at what they like, bring back all of the cut material and then finish it for Bethesda and then release it as a mod, you know? So yes, I can almost guarantee you they'll do a 1-to-1 recreation of the Millennium Falcon in Starfield at some point, just
I'm good
because
with
they
it.
can.
I like it.
Yeah. If that sounds good, that's what you're going to get. You're never going to get anything like that in Star Citizen, but if you want that sort of controllable but modifiable and focused experience, I think Starfield's your game.
Cool. I'm really excited for the base building because they introduced that in Fallout 4, right? It was like 2014, 2013. So they've been dealing with base building for like a decade now, right? So they must be pretty decent at setting it up. And the possibilities, if we're setting down on different planets, or if they combine base building to be something that you can, maybe use to customize your ship, that's going to be very cool. And I love No Man's Sky. That's where I kind of get the experience of doing that already. But it's very arcade. It's rather basic, and the graphics don't really vibe that much with me. So to see something that is considered quote unquote NASA punk do the same thing is going to be really cool. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah. We'll see how detailed they get, but I think at the very least we'll know in June. So if you're waiting for it, that's when you'll see it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that I think about wraps up the whole conversation we had. Before we head off, was there anything Star Citizen related to talk? I mean, 317 has come out for anybody who's still listening and wants to get some of that update. 317 has gone live as of recording this. You guys will be hearing this a few days later. And the Expanse has been a big focus, the new concept for refining gameplay. What's your take on that ship?
The Expanse?
Yeah.
Actually just released a video that I did on it about leading to the Q&A and talking about like if you should get it or not based off that. I think it's going to be a must-have ship for people who are working in small groups or in organizations as an addendum to salvage and mining. It's a support ship. It's one of the probably first ever support ships we're going to see in Star Citizen that's just dedicated to support, other than say like a medical ship.
Right.
So
I think it's
I think it's cool, but it's not my bag. So
what do you think of them talking about crafting?
Makes sense. They've been talking about it for a long time. The old craft bench was the idea that, like, overclocking your personal gear and stuff like that.
Right. So. Right. Let's see. I've been wanting to talk more about refueling. I actually haven't gotten to experience it that much in 317, but it's clearly a big deal. It's something that they've put a lot of work into, it seems like, and it's supposed to be meant for pyro. Now that we've gotten the refueling and you kind of seen it in the game, do you think that people are going to pick it up and use it how it's meant to be used once we get pyro? Do you think like it's going to work out how CIG envisions?
Yes. That one's harder to tell. Just because we don't know what we're going to experience in pyro. Like what we know in pyro is it's bigger than Stanton, it's more lawless than Stanton, and it doesn't have a lot of like support. So in the region. So I think if anything, CIG knows more than us. So I'd argue that yes, it's probably the case. But then again, CIG doesn't seem to predict players' actions as well.
Right. And the way that CIG has formatted this game is for people to play a very thinking game. And if there's one thing we've learned about gamers, is that we have some trouble thinking at times. And so I just wonder, like, they want us to go out into pyro and probably have a refueling ship that's either with our group or that we know is already there. And I'm just I don't know. I just trying to wrap my head around it and see it in the future happening.
I could see, fuel rats were a thing in Elite.
Yeah.
So,
but refueling in Elite, what does that encompass? It's just
you hail a crew, and they come by and they disgorge their limpets, which is these little drones, and then the drones will then go over and then they refill up the stuff and they go away. I don't even know if there's payment involved. There may be payment involved through that system, but.
Okay. Well, we'll have to see. I still haven't used the refueling. I'm excited to see players playing together, but now that we're starting to get those types of gameplay into the game, I'm like, okay, is it actually going to work now? But that about wraps it up. I just wanted to touch on some Star Citizen stuff with you, just to say we did, just to say it was in there. But this has been a talk about Starfield coming up. It's a new space game. I'm excited for it. Paul's excited for it. I think a lot of people in the community that we normally are talking to are really looking forward to seeing what happens with it. So, like you said, June 12th is when we're expecting the gameplay. And until then, you can expect some lore from AstroPub, and I don't even know what from me, but something. And why don't you tell them before we head out where they can find that lore and your streams and stuff?
YouTube.com/TheAstroPub and Twitch.tv/TheAstroPub. I actually do have a kind of a primer for what we know about Starfield lore currently up on my channel there. So go check that out if you want to know a little bit more about in depth about sort of things like the colony wars and such. And I'll be definitely covering more content in the future. And you can catch me live on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, Thursday and Friday evenings, and Saturday and Sunday afternoons at twitch.tv/TheAstroPub.
Cool. And we will definitely be having some follow-up chats on this very podcast about Starfield. This podcast is mainly covering Star Citizen, but it really does just center around space-based games in general, and Starfield's a big one. So if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe, leave a review maybe, and come back to see other episodes. But you guys can always find the Launch Sequence podcast on your favorite audio platform, Anchor, Amazon, Pocket Casts, all this stuff, Apple, Spotify, and you can come and watch on YouTube if you'd like. But whatever you decided to do, I thank you so much for checking out the show, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Smash it.